The gavel fell like a headsman's axe, the sound swallowed by the sudden, collective intake of breath in the stifling London auction hall. Ilara stood on the block, a statue in borrowed grey silk, her face a pale, composed oval. She could not see the sea of faces turned up to her, the candlelight glinting on jewels and hungry eyes, but she could feel their heat, their curiosity, their disdain. She could smell the cloying mix of sweat, stale champagne, and heavy perfumes. She heard the rustle of silks and the low murmur of speculation that had followed her up the steps. The blind merchandise, a man had whispered, too close to her ear. Now, a profound silence had descended, broken only by the auctioneer's triumphant, slightly breathless pronouncement. Sold for the sum of £50,000 to His Grace, the Duke of Beaumont. A gasp rippled through the room, a sound of pure shock. The Duke of Beaumont, the Iron Duke, a man whose name was a weapon, a spectre at society's feast. He never attended such events. He was a creature of stone manners and iron ledgers, a recluse whose heart was said to have been carved from the same granite as his fortress in the north. Ilara heard the furious, choked sound of Lord Harrington, the man who was to have been her husband, the man whose family had placed her here to settle their debts. She heard the sharp, incredulous laugh of his rival, Lord Ashworth. This was not about her. This was a move in a game she could not see, played by men who saw her as nothing more than a pawn. Then she heard new sounds, the decisive tread of heavy, polished boots on the wooden floor, parting the crowd like a ship's prow through water. The footsteps stopped directly before the block. The air grew colder, charged with a presence that was absolute, a stillness that commanded more attention than any shout. She felt, more than heard, the man below her. He did not speak to the auctioneer. He did not speak to the murmuring crowd. His voice, when it came, was low, devoid of triumph or any emotion at all, and directed only at her. "Miss Ainsworth, you may come down now." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, as though the world had been rearranged to make it so. Two men, the auctioneer's assistants, moved to help her, but the Duke's voice cut through the air again, sharper this time. "I will escort my wife." Wife. The word hung in the air, a second fall of the gavel. He ascended the 2 steps, and she felt the warmth of his body before he touched her. His hand, when it took her elbow, was bare, warm, and firm. It was not a gesture of comfort, but of ownership. He guided her down the steps and through the silent, staring assembly. No one dared speak. No one dared move. The only sound was their footsteps, his steady and hers lighter, but just as even. She would not stumble. She would not show fear. The chill of the night air on the street was a relief. The carriage door opened, and he guided her inside. The plush velvet was a surprise after the hard utility of the auction house. He settled opposite her, the carriage rocking slightly with his weight. The door closed with a solid, final thud, sealing them in darkness and silence, shutting out the world that had just sold her. After a long moment, his voice came again from the shadows, quiet and precise. "The performance is over. The contract begins now. If you long for stories where the overlooked find their strength, subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, as we begin Ilara's journey. Her life had not always been one of darkness and transactions. She remembered light and colour and her mother's face. But a fever at the age of 8 had stolen her sight, leaving behind a world she had to rebuild through sound, touch, and an unnerving clarity of mind. Her father, a merchant whose ambition had always outstripped his means, saw her affliction not as a tragedy, but as a depreciation of his finest asset. He had intended to marry her into the aristocracy, to trade her beauty and dowry for a title. Now she was flawed. Her stepmother, A woman of brittle beauty and a small, cruel mind, treated Alara with a mixture of pity and contempt, a constant reminder of her uselessness. "Do try not to knock anything over, dear," was her daily refrain, as Alara navigated the house with a grace that came from memory and intense concentration. It was Lord Harrington who discovered she was not useless at all. He was handsome, charming, and his family, though titled, was teetering on the edge of financial ruin. During their courtship, he spoke to her for hours, at first out of a sense of duty, then with a dawning, avaricious interest. He realized she did not just listen. She processed. She could sit in a room, a silent, sightless presence, and absorb the nuances of a conversation, the hesitation in a business rival's voice, the over-eager confidence of a swindler. Her memory was flawless. He began to use her. He would have his secretaries read complex financial reports to her, and she would find the flaws in logic, the hidden risks, the patterns no one else could discern. She became the secret architect of his family's temporary recovery. She did not mind the work. It was a relief to be useful, to have her mind engaged. She mistook his reliance for affection, his praise for love. He promised her marriage, a life where her intelligence would be his guiding star. The betrayal was as swift as it was absolute. A series of disastrous investments, made against her advice, finally broke the Harrington finances. Creditors circled. Among them, a name from an old, forgotten contract emerged: Beaumont. Her own father, in a desperate move years ago, had signed away a marker to the Duke's father, a debt of staggering proportions. The Iron Duke, the current Duke of Beaumont, called it in. He did not want money. The Harringtons had none. The terms of the old contract allowed for the claiming of a tangible asset. And so a meeting was held in her father's study. Alara was not invited, but she stood in the hall outside, her hand on the cool wood of the door, and listened. She heard her father's pleading voice. She heard Lord Harrington's father offer her Alara as a settlement. "She is of fine birth, Your Grace, still beautiful despite her condition. A marriage contract to be dissolved at your convenience would settle the matter." The final blow was not their offer, but her fiancé's silence. He did not object. He did not defend her. He allowed her to be sold. The private offer was somehow leaked, becoming a public spectacle, an auction to maximize the Harringtons' humiliation and potential gain. She was escorted from her home that evening by men she did not know, her stepmother pressing a small, cold purse into her hand without a word. She was no longer a daughter or a fiancée, she was merchandise. The journey to Blackwood Manor was made in a punishing silence. The Duke of Beaumont did not speak again, and Alara, wrapped in her own composure, did not ask questions. She listened to the rhythm of the horses' hooves, the creak of the leather seats, the steady, quiet breathing of the man across from her. It was a breathing that gave nothing away. When they arrived, the air that met her as the carriage door opened was different from London's. It was clean and cold, smelling of damp stone, wet earth, and the faint, resinous scent of pine from a distant forest. The manor did not feel like a home. It felt like a part of the landscape, a stone outcrop against the night sky. The Duke led her up a wide flight of stone steps. Her hand on the balustrade was a guide. The stone was ancient, worn smooth and cold beneath her fingertips. Inside, the silence was even more profound. There were no echoes, only a heavy, weighted quiet that seemed to absorb all sound. The air inside was cool and smelled of beeswax, old wood, and something metallic, like polished iron. A woman's voice, crisp and starched, cut through the stillness. "Your Grace, you have returned." "Mrs. Croft." The Duke's voice was flat. "This is the Duchess. She will require rooms in the East Wing. Have Bessie attend her." There was a beat of silence, and Alara could picture the housekeeper, a woman of severe posture and unflinching judgment, taking in the sight of her new mistress, the plain dress, the sightless eyes. "Very good, Your Grace." The housekeeper's footsteps were heavy and decisive as she moved away. The Duke then addressed Ilara directly. "We will speak in the library." He guided her again, his touch on her elbow impersonal and efficient. They walked across what felt like a vast stone floor, then onto a thick rug that muffled their steps. A door opened, and the scent of leather, paper, and wood smoke washed over her. A fire was burning. She could feel its distant warmth on her cheek. He led her to a chair, leather, deep and comfortable, and settled her into it before moving away, the sound of his footsteps receding as he walked to what she presumed was a desk. "The terms of our arrangement must be understood," he began, his voice the same dispassionate tone he'd used in the carriage. "You are now the Duchess of Beaumont. This title affords you my protection. No one will trouble you again. This house, this estate, is your domain. You will have an allowance that will render you financially independent for the rest of your life. In return, I require 2 things. First, you will manage this household. It has been neglected. The staff are lax, the accounts are in disarray. I require order. Second, you will present a respectable and placid front to the world on the rare occasions it is necessary. You will be my Duchess in name and in public duty. That is all." He paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. "I offer you safety and security. I do not offer affection. I do not offer companionship. Our lives will be lived in parallel, under the same roof. This is a business arrangement. Do you find these terms acceptable?" Ilara took a breath. The coldness of his proposal was not an insult. It was a relief. It was honest. After the suffocating hypocrisy of the Harringtons, this stark clarity felt like solid ground beneath her feet. Cold indifference was survivable. Active cruelty, disguised as love, was not. "The terms are acceptable, Your Grace," she said, her own voice steady. "Good," he replied. "Bessie will show you to your rooms. We will breakfast at 8, separately." In the days that followed, Ilara began to build a map of Blackwood Manor in her mind. It was a geography of sound, scent, and texture. She learned the particular groan of the 5th step on the grand staircase, the cool draught that whispered from beneath the door to the shuttered north wing, the way the morning sun felt as a warm patch on the Aubusson rug in the gallery. Her personal maid, Bessie, was her eyes. A young woman with a quiet disposition and light, quick footsteps, Bessie described the world to Ilara in simple, factual terms, without the pitying embellishments Ilara had grown to despise. "The wallpaper is peeling near the ceiling, my lady," she would say. Or, "The tapestries in the great hall are of a forest hunt, but the colours are faded to grey and brown." Through Bessie's descriptions and her own sensory exploration, Ilara came to understand her new home. It was a place of immense, neglected grandeur. A fortress, as the Duke had implied, but one whose garrison had grown complacent. Her first act as Duchess was to request the household ledgers. Mrs. Croft, the housekeeper, presented them with a sniff of disapproval, her scepticism a palpable force in the room. "His Grace has always left the accounts to Mr. Finch, the steward," she stated, her tone implying that a blind woman could hardly be expected to improve upon his methods. Ilara merely smiled. "Please, have Bessie bring them to my study, and send for Mr. Finch. I will see him at 10. For 2 days she sat with Bessie, who read aloud the endless columns of figures, her young voice patient and clear. Ilara listened, her mind sifting through the data, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. It was the same work she had done for Harrington, but now it was for herself. She found it immediately. The inflated prices from the butcher. The ghost wages for stable hands who did not exist. The steady, systematic bleeding of the estate, by a steward who assumed no one was watching. When she met with Mr. Finch, a man with a hearty, booming voice that didn't quite mask a nervous tremor, she did not accuse. She simply questioned. "Mr. Finch," she began, her hands folded calmly on the desk before her. "Can you explain why we are paying 6p a pound for beef when the market price in the village is 4p?" His blustering reply was full of excuses about quality and delivery, but she cut through it. "And the 3 new groundskeepers hired in April. I have walked the grounds. I have heard only the footsteps of Mr. Abernathy, who has tended the gardens here for 40 years. Where are these other men?" By the end of the hour, Mr. Finch was a sweating, stammering wreck. He was dismissed by noon. Elara then sent for the local suppliers herself. She met them not in the grand study, but in the kitchens, a space of warm stone and the scent of baking bread. She renegotiated every contract, her memory for their own prices and her grasp of the market leaving them stunned. The staff, who had watched with suspicion, began to move with a new purpose. Mrs. Croft's "Very good, my lady" started to sound less like a judgment and more like respect. All the while the Duke watched. Elara never saw him, but she felt his presence. A sudden stillness at the end of a corridor, the faint scent of his cologne, sandalwood and iron, lingering in a room he had just left. A shadow at the top of the stairs as she passed below. He never spoke to her about the changes she was making. He did not need to. The evidence was in the improved meals, the quiet efficiency of the servants, the sudden health of the estate's finances. One afternoon, exploring the grounds with Bessie, she discovered a high stone wall, nearly invisible beneath a curtain of ivy. A heavy oak door, swollen shut in its frame, was the only entrance. With some effort they forced it open. The air that spilled out was thick and still, fragrant with the smell of decay and the ghost of roses. It was a walled garden, long abandoned. The paths were choked with weeds, the stone benches green with moss. But beneath the neglect, the structure was still there. A broken fountain, a sundial, the gnarled, thorny skeletons of climbing roses. "No one has come in here for years, my lady," Bessie whispered, "since the old Duchess, His Grace's mother." That evening, Elara began to work, her gloved hands finding the tough roots of the weeds, her mind slowly, carefully, mapping a space that could be brought back to life. And from a high window in the library, the Duke watched her, a small figure in the fading light, kneeling in the dirt, creating order out of chaos. The library became her sanctuary. The Duke rarely used it during the day, and she found a strange peace in the scent of aging paper and leather, the profound silence broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock. Her fingers would trail along the spines of the books, feeling the different textures of the bindings, Bessie's voice a low murmur as she read aloud from novels or poetry. It was here, in this room of words and shadows, that she made the discovery that would alter the careful balance of her new life. She had been tracing the intricate pattern of the Persian rug near the fireplace when her foot caught on a subtle unevenness in the floorboards beneath. Curious, she knelt, her hands exploring the area. It was a loose board, its edges slightly raised. "Bessie," she called softly, "bring a letter opener. I think there is something here." Together they pried the board up. In the dark cavity below lay a flat metal box, cold and heavy. It was locked. "There is a keyhole, my lady," Bessie said, her voice hushed with a sense of trespass. Elara ran her fingers over the lock. It was a simple tumbler mechanism, one she recognized from the caskets her father used to import. "In my sewing box," she said, her voice calm. "There is a long needle for darning wool, and a hairpin from my dressing table. Bring them to me." Bessie returned, her eyes wide. With the girl holding the box steady, Elara worked by touch, the needle and the hairpin her instruments. She probed the lock, feeling for the faint click of the tumblers. It took several minutes of intense concentration, but at last she felt the mechanism give way. She lifted the heavy lid. A faint scent of dried lavender and old paper rose from within. "What is inside?" Alara asked. "Letters, my lady," Bessie whispered, lifting one out, tied with a blue ribbon. "Read one to me, please." Bessie untied the ribbon, her fingers fumbling slightly, and began to read. The letter was dated 15 years prior. The handwriting, Bessie said, was elegant and feminine. It was from a woman named Clara to her dearest friend. She wrote of her brother, Alistair, not the Iron Duke, but a younger man, full of laughter and a fierce, protective love for his family. She wrote of his engagement to a beautiful woman named Lady Annalise. And then, the tone of the letters shifted. Clara wrote of a new family in their social circle, the Harringtons, and their charming, ambitious son. She wrote of Annalise spending more and more time with them, of Alistair's growing unease. The final letter was stained with what Bessie described as tear marks. It laid the betrayal bare. Lady Annalise had not loved Alistair. She had been a spy, feeding the details of the Beaumont finances and shipping interests to Lord Harrington's father, Alistair's greatest business rival. The Harringtons used the information to orchestrate a financial attack that nearly ruined the Beaumonts. The scandal cost Alistair's sister, Clara, her own engagement to a good man, and the shock, the letter implied, contributed to their mother's early death. Alistair had saved his family, but the effort had cost him his youth and his heart. He had rebuilt their fortune with a singular, ruthless focus, crushing his rivals, earning his cold reputation. And the Harringtons had been his primary, long-term target. Alara sat back in her chair, the warmth of the fire suddenly failing to reach her. It all clicked into place. The auction, the specific price, the public humiliation. It was not a random act of spite. It was the calculated final move in a war that had been raging for 15 years. He hadn't just bought a duchess. He had taken the last, most precious asset from the family who had tried to destroy him, the very woman they had intended to use to save themselves. She was not his partner. She was his trophy, the final piece in his revenge. That evening she did not wait for him in the library. She sent Bessie to his study with a message. "The Duchess requires a word with you at your convenience." It was a summons, not a request. He came within the quarter hour. She heard his footsteps halt in the library doorway. He did not enter immediately, and she knew he was observing her, standing by the fire, her hands clasped behind her back. "You wish to see me?" he said. It was not a question. "I did," she replied, turning her face toward the sound of his voice. "Bessie and I found some letters. From your sister, Clara." She let the name hang in the air between them. The silence that followed was dense, heavy. She heard him take a single step into the room, the soft click of the door closing behind him. "I see," he said, his voice scraped bare of all inflection. "You bought me to complete a revenge," she stated, keeping her own voice level. It was crucial that he not hear an accusation, only a fact. "You used the Harringtons' desperation to take the one thing they believed would secure their future. Me. It was the perfect final checkmate." He did not deny it. He walked slowly across the room until he was standing on the other side of the hearth, the fire crackling between them. She could feel the heat from the flames and the cold radiating from him. "That was my initial motive," he admitted, his voice low and hard as river stone. It was the culmination of a decade and a half of planning. To see Harrington's face when the gavel fell, it afforded me a satisfaction I had not anticipated. His honesty was as brutal as his reputation. He was not apologizing. He was not explaining. He was confirming. "But," he continued, and there was a subtle shift in his tone, a crack in the iron surface, "it is no longer my sole motive." Before she could ask what he meant, what could have possibly changed, there was a commotion in the hall. A raised voice, imperious and familiar, arguing with the butler. The door to the library was thrust open without a knock. "Elara, thank God I have found you!" Lord Harrington stood there, his hair artfully dishevelled, his expression a mask of frantic concern. He strode into the room, ignoring the Duke completely, his eyes fixed on Elara. "My dearest, I have been half mad with worry. To be sold to this brute. I am here to rescue you. We can still be together. My family has arranged it. We will say you were coerced, that this monster took advantage of your condition." He reached for her, but Alistair moved with a speed that was startling in such a large man, placing himself between them. He did not touch Harrington. He simply stood there, a wall of black wool and silent menace. But he did not speak. He waited. He was leaving the choice, the voice, to her. It was, in that moment, the greatest act of respect anyone had ever shown her. Elara lifted her chin. "There is no need for a rescue, Lord Harrington," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. "You seem to be operating under a number of misapprehensions. Let me correct them. My condition is not a weakness you can use to invalidate my choices. This brute, as you call him, has offered me more honesty in a month than you did in 2 years of false courtship, and you did not come here to save me. You came here because you have realized too late what you discarded." She took a step forward, aligning herself with Alistair. "I am the Duchess of Beaumont. This is my home. You are not welcome in it. Please leave." Harrington stared, his mouth agape. He looked from her resolute face to the Duke's implacable one. For the first time in his life, he was utterly defeated. Without another word, he turned and fled the room. The silence that Harrington left in his wake was entirely different from the ones that had come before. It was not empty or tense, but filled with the resonance of her spoken words and Alistair's silent support. The heavy library door clicked shut as the butler secured it. They were alone again, standing on either side of the hearth. The confrontation had changed the very air between them. Elara could feel the shift, a subtle realignment of the forces in the room. He had given her the power, and she had used it. "He thought my blindness made me a lamb to be led," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "He never understood that I listen." "He is a fool." Alistair's voice was rough, tight with an emotion she could not name. He saw only a flawed object. He never saw the woman. She heard him move, the sound of a decanter and a glass, then the soft sigh of the leather chair as he sat down. She did not move from her place by the fire. He was right. Harrington, her father, her stepmother, they had all seen a broken thing. They had never bothered to look closer. A long, quiet minute passed. The only sound was the fire, a log settling with a soft hiss. "My first fiancée, Annalise," he began, his voice low and devoid of its usual iron control. It was the voice of a man speaking of an old, deep wound. "She did not just betray me. She used my affection as a weapon against my family. She smiled at my mother. She charmed my sister, all while she was methodically dismantling our lives for the benefit of the Harringtons. When I discovered the truth, I swore I would never again allow emotion to make me vulnerable. I would never allow anyone that close. I built this life, this house, this reputation, as a fortress to ensure it." He paused, and she could hear the faint sound of his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. "Then you arrived." he continued, his voice quieter still. You were supposed to be a symbol, a living monument to my victory. You were not supposed to see the cracks in the walls. You were not supposed to put my house in order. You were not supposed to make the damned garden grow. The firelight warmed her back. She waited. I find myself listening for your footsteps on the stairs. He finished, the admission raw and unadorned. It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same precision he used for his business ledgers. And because of that, it was the most devastatingly honest thing she had ever heard. It was an admission of a breach in his fortress, a breach he had not fought, but had simply observed. And then accepted. Slowly she turned from the fire and held out her hand into the space between them. For a moment there was only the sound of the fire. Then she heard him rise, his footsteps soft on the rug. His hand, when it took hers, was large and warm. His fingers curled around hers, a firm, grounding pressure that was not about ownership or control, but about connection. He did not let go. The Duke of Wessex's annual ball was the pinnacle of the London season, a glittering affair where reputations were made and destroyed. Alistair had not attended in over a decade, and their arrival created a sensation. A wave of whispers followed them as Alistair guided Alara through the crowded ballroom, his hand a steady presence at the small of her back. She could feel the stares, hear the snippets of conversation. The Iron Duke, and his blind bride. A creature of pity, isn't she? He only bought her for spite, you know, to ruin the Harringtons completely. She paid them no mind. Her world was the solid warmth of Alistair's hand, the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to his coat, and the map of the room she was building from the echoes of footsteps and the murmur of voices. Lord Harrington and his family were in attendance. Alara could sense their presence like a drop in temperature, their animosity a palpable force across the room. They were working the crowd, spreading their poison, painting her as a victim and Alistair as a villain. During a lull in the music, as they stood near a set of open French doors, a figure approached. The rustle of expensive silk and the cloying scent of rosewater perfume announced Harrington's mother before she even spoke. "You poor dear child." The woman's voice was a confection of false sympathy. "So brave of you to attend. We were all so worried, trapped here with such a cold, unfeeling man. If only you had been more patient, my dear, we would have found a suitable place for you." The circle of listeners around them fell silent, eager for the drama. This was the attack, public and vicious. Alara felt Alistair tense beside her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But before he could speak, she turned her face towards the sound of the Dowager Lady Harrington's voice. "A place?" she asked, her own voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the sudden quiet. "You mean a cage, madam? A quiet room where I could continue to analyze your finances while your son spent the profits on a more suitable wife. You valued my mind only when it could make you money. You discarded my person when it became a liability." She took a small step forward, away from Alistair's protective stance, claiming the space as her own. "My husband," she said, the word ringing with pride, "values the person. He has not caged me. He has given me a home, a purpose, and the freedom to be more than a tool for other people's ambitions." It was then that Alistair spoke, his voice not loud, but possessed of a quality that cut through every other sound in the vast ballroom, drawing every eye. "My wife," he said, looking not at Lady Harrington but at the assembled guests, "is the most formidable woman in this room. While your wives and daughters have been occupied with gossip and gowns, my Duchess has restructured the accounts of an estate spanning 10,000 acres. She commands a staff of 50 with more efficiency than a regimental captain, and she possesses a mind for strategy and finance that would put the Chancellor of the Exchequer to shame. He paused, letting his words sink in. Her blindness is an inconvenience. Your family's moral bankruptcy, Lady Harrington, is a terminal disease. I suggest you attend to it. He then turned to Alara, and his gesture was for her alone, though the entire room watched. He took her gloved hand, raised it to his lips, and bowed his head over it. "My Duchess," he said, his voice now a low murmur only she could hear, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" He led her to the center of the floor as the orchestra, recovering its senses, struck up a waltz, and as he swept her into the music, Alara knew that the whispers had been silenced, not by fear of the Iron Duke, but by respect for his Duchess. Months passed, turning the chill of spring into the deep, warm green of late summer. The world of Blackwood Manor had settled into a new rhythm, one of quiet contentment. Bessie, her loyalty and intelligence undeniable, had been promoted to housekeeper, her quiet competence now directing the household with a gentle hand. The ledgers were balanced, the staff were content, and the manor itself seemed to breathe more easily, its neglected corners now clean and filled with light. The heart of this new world was the walled garden. Under Ilara's patient tending, it had transformed. The choked paths were now clear, lined with fragrant lavender and thyme. The stone benches were scrubbed clean of moss, and the gnarled skeletons of the old roses had burst forth with a profusion of crimson and white blossoms, their scent a constant sweet presence in the air. The broken fountain had been repaired, its gentle splashing a soothing counterpoint to the drone of bees. One warm afternoon, Alistair found her there, as he often did. She was kneeling on a soft cushion, her hands in the rich earth, carefully tending a bed of herbs. She did not need to see to know which plant was which. Their scents and textures were as familiar to her as old friends. He had been sitting on a nearby bench, reading aloud to her from a book of poetry, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. Now the reading had stopped. She felt his presence as he came to stand beside her, his shadow falling over her. She looked up, a smile touching her lips. "The contract has changed, I believe," she said softly, continuing a conversation that had been ongoing between them for weeks, a quiet renegotiation of terms. "The original articles are no longer accurate." He was silent for a moment. Then he knelt in the grass beside her, heedless of the fine wool of his trousers. He took one of her soil-stained hands in his touch gentle. "Then we shall write a new one," he said, his voice serious, but with an undercurrent of warmth that was now so familiar to her. He raised her hand, examining the dirt beneath her nails with a fond expression she could feel in his touch. Term 1. What was transactional is now essential. The management of this house is no longer a duty, but a partnership. He met her unseeing eyes, and she knew his gaze was intent. Term 2. What was a fortress is now a home. The walls are not to keep others out, but to keep us in. Together. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was no longer a public performance, but a private truth. Term 3. He whispered against her skin. "I love you, Alara Beaumont." A quiet joy, pure and profound, bloomed in her chest, as vibrant as the roses around them. "And I love you, Alistair," she replied, her voice steady and sure. And there they remained, kneeling together in the dirt of the garden they had brought back to life, two solitary people who had found in their strange, sterile contract the seeds of an unexpected and beautiful harvest. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Do you believe a love that starts as a contract can ever be truly real? Let us know your thoughts, and where you're watching from in the comments below. For in the end, love arrives through whatever gaps are left.